Hello and welcome to the Sound Doctrine podcast in a new format. It's the original gang. Back to us three. How we doing, guys?
Oh my gosh, it is so wild. This is
This
all
is
new.
crazy.
We have no idea what we're doing with
We
this.
don't know what we're doing. It's like season 1 where we didn't know what we're doing. We still don't know what we're doing, but in a different way.
It's crazy. We are now all over the country. We were back when we recorded that episode. We did not expect that we would now be everywhere. So let's just all go around, give everybody a little update about, what we're doing, where we're at. Keaton, we'll start with you over there.
Well, yeah, so as you guys know, I was working at a church in Marion, and now I'm still in Marion, but I'm at a different church. So I currently am serving as a resident youth pastor at a church here in Marion. It's been great. Loved it. It's been just absolutely amazing.
Will, how about you, man?
Yeah, right now I'm just waiting for God's call to a church, seeing where he wants me. I'm currently in Ohio. We're living with my wife's family right now and kind of in a central location to see where God wants us. But yeah, a lot of crazy stuff happened,
Yes.
We said we're coming back. The joke we said it was coming back May 1st, and now it will be October. So, a lot changed for us. And, so we'll get into it.
Keaton and I, we were working at the same church. We were all three going to the same church. And we'll talk about a little bit why we're all over the place. But now I'm working at a church in Fort Myers, and it's been, we'll use the word crazy. It definitely has been crazy. Not only like the life circumstances, but also how God's worked through this whole thing and the way that His plans are greater. They talk about how life is better seen through the rear view mirror because you can see like all the places that God's taken you. And I think I'm at the point where I'm now looking back at the rear view mirror and I'm like, whoa, God, you were working back miles and miles ago, and I had no idea. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And so now we're at this place where we're kind of at this different spot. Keaton, since you're still boots on the ground at the church that we were at, if you want to talk about a little bit about that transition and kind of what that looked like, and then what God's doing through your context now after the changes that happened in our church and how God's church is now bigger. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so give me some time because there's a lot of story here. But the reality is we got to about the springtime of this year, and we were just kind of trying to figure out what God was calling us to in this next season of life. And as a church, we were a smaller congregation, about 500, but our church really ultimately could fill about, I would say probably around almost 2,000 if we really wanted to push it. I think so. Like, we were a small church in a really, really big building, and the reality is small congregation, big building, especially an old building, it just had a lot of problems with it. And because of the size of the congregation, we really couldn't afford to keep the building in the condition that it needed to be. So we were in that situation. And we're just praying for God's guidance and just kind of wisdom in the situations of just like what he wanted us to do. And lo and behold, there was another church in the community who was doing pretty much the exact same kind of ministry we were doing, like same language we were using, trying to reach the same people, obviously the people of Marion. So it was just kind of like we came to, so I like hit my computer. It was just kind of one of those things where we just had to ask ourselves, like, why are we doing ministry separate when we could do ministry better together? And the reality is their church was actively growing. Ours was too, but theirs was growing at a much rapid rate. I think they're at a 60% growth rate at the time, which is like crazy for a church. Yeah. And we were just kind of like, let's talk about what it would look like maybe to merge, because the reality is they needed a building because they're outgrowing their building. And here we are with a massive building, and we were like, well, let's just partner together and do God's work together. So honestly, I mean, and Caleb, you can speak a little bit into this as well because you were there for this. But like we went through the processes, and we watched a church, which I think, how old was it was like 70 years old.
I think it was closer to 80 because I think they opened early 60s. I think like 61, 62.
Yeah, so an older congregation, older church. It's kind of been in the town and in the community for a very long time. And to watch that congregation just approach this conversation with just so much prayer and discernment. We went into a crazy discernment process. We were meeting with pastors, we were having coffee conversations, ultimately just trying to figure out hey, is this what God wants us to do? And this was obviously what we were doing as a church, but also what the church we're currently working at was doing as well. And it just kind of came down to that move where we made the vote, we made the decision, and we decided we were going to merge. And again, merging two congregations isn't easy. There's some ups and downs. Obviously, not everyone is 100% for it, but I didn't hear necessarily too many people who were like, this is not what God wants us to do. A lot of people were actually saying we believe this is what God's calling us to, even if they weren't necessarily going to be like, hey, yeah, we're going to make this our church home after the merger. So it was just so cool to see a church be so selfless and so sacrificial in just everything. I've never seen a congregation be like, you know what? Yeah, let's just die to self and just for the greater good of the community and for God's church. So it's just been such an amazing thing to witness. And now I think we're 2 months in since the merger happened, and it's been incredible. It's had its ups and downs, yeah, but I think
You're closer to 3 months, I'm pretty sure.
it's gone
Because
that
wasn't it
fast.
July 16th?
July 1.
July 1, yeah.
Yeah,
So
July 1, yeah.
technically, well, yeah, when you're over 3 months, I think, right? July, August.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible. I mean, again, there's always headaches when doing this kind of stuff, but honestly, it has been such an amazing opportunity to watch God move in such a miraculous way in the lives of two separate churches, learning to become one. And I think, Caleb, you were there for this conversation, but on the last service of Lakeview's life, we had someone come up and she spoke, and she said
I was there for that too, also.
I'm sorry, Will. Yeah, we were all there. But the reality is, this older woman, she looked at the congregation and said, "Today is not your funeral. This is your wedding day." And it changed the perspective of the conversation, because what she basically said was yeah, you're gonna get a name change. You're going to become one with this other church. You're going to leave the old homestead while you're going to move to a new homestead while the old's getting fixed. So you can come back. And she said, make new babies, which I thought was funny, but make new converts, make new believers. And it's just a miraculous thing. And just watching it all go down now, that's the mindset I've kept with me. It's just yeah, it's a marriage. Yeah, marriages have their ups and downs. Not everything is perfect, but the reality is we're joined at the hip now. And serving the Lord together, and there's no better way I could see this happening. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, it's a change in kingdom mindset, and she kind of hit on it. But we can in church, I think we can be very concerned about the name, the brand. But I think once we start to realize that the biggest thing that we could do for the kingdom is just follow His leading, and wherever the King's going is where we want to go. And not even saying that merging with another church is what's good for every church, because God is calling us each to something different. But for us, we were listening to God's calling, and we talked about, is this the right decision for us, about how to hear God's word, and how to hear His voice, and how to discern what God's pleasing and perfect will is for our lives and for our church and for our community. And so when we had those conversations, at the very end, there was no doubt about, is this God's plan? Because we'd already spent all this time. And once we had that kingdom mindset about this is really God's kingdom. This isn't about this church or this church. It's all about what can we do that's following the leading that God's giving us. And I think that mentality totally changed our outlook that our people had about being willing to die to self, because, there was a resurrection plan already for our people. We die for our brand, if you will, but we're raised up to do God's kingdom work in a new, exciting way that only God can do. And so I think that was something for me that I learned as someone walking through that process before I was sent out to go do ministry. It was just that really changed my perspective.
Yeah, it was honestly, it was incredible, and it still is incredible. God is still doing amazing things through the church that I'm currently serving at. We went last year, their numbers just in the youth ministry alone was 50 in their high school ministry, and when I got here after the merger, we're now running around 120. So it's we did more than double our numbers, and that's not necessarily because of the merger. It's just because of what God has been doing.
Well, and so I would say, you said that the church was growing at what did you say, 60 something percent, and from our conversations, it seems like they're probably growing a lot faster than 60% right now. You're talking about how you guys are outgrowing the overflow rooms. You you're in the current building that the church was at, and you are outgrowing that. I mean, more than you're knocking down walls, and just like you can't contain the people that are coming. And what a great problem to have. You know what? In
Yeah,
ministry, you're never like, oh, there's too many people wanting to know God.
I mean,
yeah,
that's the
and
Corey Asbury approach to ministry. There's no wall you won't kick down, and man,
Amen.
they're kicking down walls for
no,
that reckless love.
and no joke. I mean, our current sanctuary, I think, can fit a little bit over 500, and we're a church of, I think, 2,800 and growing rapidly. So it's
Yeah.
like we had to add a fourth service on Thursday night specifically to cater to not only just a different group of people, but just like, Lord, please just may some people on Sunday just go to Thursday so we can free up some seats, because our mentality with it all is an open seat is another soul. So
Yeah.
another soul saved is that open seat. So if we can open more seats, that's more lives saved. So that's the mentality. So that's why we honestly created overflow space. Like, we didn't have one, and now we do because we needed it. So
Yeah.
it's crazy. So Caleb, explain a little bit about what you've been doing, because obviously I moved to the river. I worked on staff, and then you decided to go out and you were sent to Fort Myers.
Yeah, that was a whole crazy few months. So when the merger happened, I had the opportunity to be sent out to go do ministry. And so I didn't know where that was. I knew that God had equipped me for worship ministry. I ended my time at Lakeview as a resident in worship arts. My degree is in worship. And so I was like, I know that God's calling me to be a worship pastor, but there was no clear direction about where. There was a whole lot direction about really anything else other than you're going to go be a worship pastor. All right, God, like whatever. I'll go wherever you call me. And so that led to a lot of months of interviews. I felt like I had an interview a day, a conversation a day with these different churches. And it was a really interesting conversation because during that time, a lot of opportunities came up for me to go interview here, to go candidate at this church. And I said no a lot. And I think that the conversations that we were having about the merger with Lakeview, I think prepared my heart to be like, okay, God, like, what is it that you want? I know that this is the call that you had for our church, for our people was the call that you had, but what does that mean for me? And what are you going to call me to? Because I know that you're not done writing my story with Lakeview's story, right? Even though Lakeview's story is being merged with a different one, I know that you also want that for me. And so it led to just a lot of conversations, a lot of prayer, everything you could imagine someone who is just like, God, what do you want for their life? That's what Kev, my wife, and I were doing. We were going through the Westland jobs page, and there was only, I think, one church that we didn't apply to. And it was this church here in Fort Myers. And so I opened the job description. I was like,
That's funny.
they had a fire that happened to their main sanctuary in 2024. And so I'd opened this page and I was like, this doesn't seem like the right church for me, because I was wanting somewhere that God had already established. I'm wanting someplace that has an LED wall and someplace that has 12 singers and a bass player and 3 guitars. I'm wanting something that really didn't exist. What I was really wanting in my heart is what my pastor calls an Egypt mentality, where
Yeah.
There was pots of meat back in Egypt. And so we keep on looking back over our shoulder being like, God, you're taking us to the promised land, but what we had back here was awesome. Bring me back to that. And I think that's where my mindset was just keep on looking back and wanting what I had before and not what God was calling me to. And that kind of brought us to Fort Myers. I had a conversation with our professor, beloved professor, Dr. Eddie Shigley, host of the Good Days podcast. And he's one of our professors for a class that we're in right now. And he had connected me with a district superintendent, and the district superintendent connected me with, lo and behold, this church in Fort Myers. And I had a interview with them, and Kevin and I went down there. We said this was the only job that we said yes, that we would candidate somewhere. We had other opportunities to candidate. This was the only one. For some reason, I felt God say, yes, go candidate in Fort Myers.
I was at Caleb's house. I was literally at Caleb's house the week before they left for Fort Myers, and I was like, "Hey, like, what's the plan with this church?" And he comes back and he's like, "Yeah, I'm wanting to go down there." And I'm like,
and
"Okay."
Even when he was talking about, I think he was at my house when he looked at the website. He's like, "This isn't it. This is not the church that like I need to go to. And we were joking like, haha, yeah, probably not. And then then he gets called a candidate. He goes, ironically, this is the church that I like didn't want to go to. And then comes back and he's like, this is it, guys. This is the one.
Right. I mean, when we went down to Fort Myers, I would have never thought they would have ended up in here, and it had nothing to do with really anything. It was just like, it was really just that I was looking for something that I was looking for the pots of meat back in Egypt.
Yeah.
I didn't have the eyes to see that God's calling me to something different. God's calling me to a place that has manna, and that doesn't have pots of meat. That doesn't mean that they're bad. That means that God's providing something different, and that's the manna that he's providing. And so my wife and I went down to Fort Myers, and it opened up our hearts and minds to see, like, God, you're doing something amazing here. And I think this is where you're calling me. And that candidating trip, even though it was awesome, that's like, because I had like this Jonah mindset, that was my whale. Like, I needed to go to Fort Myers to see it for myself. And I needed to be brought there to be able to have my eyes open to see that, God, you're doing something crazy down here. And so I remember that we got back, and Keaton, we were getting lunch one day, and you walk into my house, you're like, what are you doing? I'm like, we're
Clothes
packing.
everywhere on the floor.
Yeah,
I was
they
like,
were
we're
already packing for a job they didn't even fully know they had yet.
Boxes were being packed everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like before, before even I think before they were candidating, like I think they were already packing things.
It wasn't before we were candidating.
No, it was
but
okay. It was that, but
it was
I think you were
right
like,
after.
yeah, it was right after, and you're like, we feel really good, and so they just started packing, and we're like, okay, awesome, expecting.
That's also how I found out that they wanted this Fort Myers job, because I
Yeah,
did
they
not
just
know yet. I was coming over to ask how it went, and there he is with his suitcase and boxes packing up. And I was like,
Yeah.
He's
must have
ready.
went well.
Well, and I remember too before you got hired, you were like, okay, he's gonna get back to me on this day. And then that day he was like, yeah, we're still trying to figure some things out. I'll get back to you soon. And you're like, oh man, that's not good. And then like the next day he emailed you and was like, he's like, because you're at my house, I think the day before, and you're like, oh, we got this email. He's like, I don't know how to feel anymore. I was really excited, and I'm like, I don't know what God's doing now. And then like the next day you're like, okay, God, yeah, you know what you're doing.
And it's really funny, like, how everything turns out, because I was looking back for the pots of meat, LED wall, volunteers, multi-campus, like all these types of things. And I get to Fort Myers, and we opened up a campus already.
Yeah,
God has been moving. And so like God's just been providing the things that I thought were most important was not the reasons I'm going there, but now he's opening up these opportunities. We're doing a total rebuild because our building burnt down, and so I'm having the opportunity to like pick out our tech, and it's my responsibility now to like build up our volunteer base. And I've just been learning a lot about what it means to be a follower, and what it means to not look over my shoulder and look back at Egypt, but to look forward at the pillar of cloud, the manna that God has in front of me. And I think that's just where that imagery of being in the desert, I think, is kind of where I felt myself after being sent out, just because I didn't know where I was going. But now I feel like I've entered the promised land, where I can now see where God's presence is moving, where he's leading. And it's just been a crazy few months, just experiencing God's hand at work through all of it. Hey, Sound Doctrine family. We always like to take a second out of our episode to talk about a sponsor that is near and dear to our hearts. And today, that sponsor is Worship Warehouse. Worship Warehouse is actually a project that I started with a simple goal: to equip and empower the church with tools for ministry. We know that ministry can be tough. It can feel hard, even lonely at times. And that's why Worship Warehouse exists. It's all about giving churches the resources that they need while building a community of worship leaders who can learn from each other, encourage each other, and grow together. So if you haven't already, go check out weareworshipwarehouse.com. You'll find resources and even some Sound Doctrine content there too. We'd love for you to check it out and be a part of what God is doing through this ministry. Now, with all that being said, let's go back to the episode. So, Will, do you want to talk about where God's been leading you and how he's been moving in your life?
Yeah, okay, so my life's a little crazy right now. So during this time, well, before that, my plan before was we were in a program called Kern, and I didn't come in with any credits, and so Keaton and Caleb, they graduated on time, and I graduated a year behind. Which is fine, alright. education hasn't been my thing until college, so it's good. And so I was a year behind, and so I was supposed to start masters this past like August, September, and that was the plan. Like, also the program changed a little bit and how it was moving and stuff, and so there's just a lot of unknown and what was going on. And so the church merge happened. So, some of those doors that we thought were opening were maybe not opening so much, just with a lot of what was happening in our life. And so me and my wife sat down and we're like, well, like, God, do you still want us here in Marion, or do you think it's time for us to go move? I've graduated college. Technically, she's graduated college. Do you want us here, or do you want us, like, what is the plan for our life? And so we felt that God was telling us to go, and so I'm still gonna do masters. I'm gonna do it online now, a little bit different. But we are now in this waiting period. We thought this summer was also already crazy for me. Before anything happened in like January, I decided that I was gonna go to Zambia for 2 weeks with the church that I grew up with in New York, and I was really excited about that. I've never really done a mission trip, and that was awesome. And so, like, that was also lingering in my head, that I was like, at the end of August, well, middle of August, really, I'm gonna go to Zambia for 2 weeks. And originally, my wife was supposed to come, and then she wasn't able to come because of work. And we're like, oh man, that sucks. Like, what's going on, God? And and then then some life things happened, and that worked out. But anyways, I went to Zambia, and while I was in Zambia, like, all this crazy stuff was happening, and we were in Zambia, and I was like, okay, we're gonna move like the week after I get back from Zambia. I don't know why I thought that was the idea of what I should do. And so we moved, and we decided we were gonna move. We thought there was this ministry opportunity, and so we go to this ministry opportunity, and we were there, and we just decided that it wasn't it. And so now we have moved back to Ohio, and now we're in a waiting period. And now I'm doing what Caleb was doing. I'm just on the Wesleyan job page, applying to churches, and just waiting for God's call for us to go somewhere. Yeah, so it's definitely been a crazy summer, all of us around, especially when we in April thought that we were like, we still have a year together. We have a year that we can record this podcast in person together, and we'll figure out what's going on after a year.
Well, not even just the podcast. Like, it was also our friendship. Like, we thought we had a year to do ministry together. Like, we were all.
Yeah, we were like, this is awesome. All of our friends were leaving, and we're like, hot losers. We're all going to be together for another year.
We were picking out stage designs. We were building up programs and all these different things, because Keaton and I, in May, had gotten promotions at the church. And so we were now, like, we had a little bit more of a sandbox, had a little more freedom to, like, dream up about what ministry could look like. And so we thought we had a year just to be us guys and not have to have as much stress with the college life, but to be able to invest in what ministry looks like and to enjoy the time to do ministry all together. And not that wouldn't have been amazing. I think that would have been awesome. I think there still can be a time where
that might happen still. We don't know.
There's still the possibility for that, but I think we learned more in these past 2 months about what it means to actually be in ministry, and not just ministry isn't a job, and ministry goes beyond a place and a location and a vocation, but it comes back to a call.
Yeah.
And the call isn't just a moment in time. It's continuing to beckon us closer and closer to him. It's not just, I've called you to ministry, and that's part of our calls. I mean, that's the whole reason we all went to college. It's the whole reason we met. It's the whole reason we were going to the church that we were at, is because we had this call to ministry. But the call isn't just a moment in time, but it's a continuing from God to say, like, if you're going to be part of my ministry, if you're going to be continuing in the path that I've called you, you have to take the next step. And that next step sometimes is in the middle of nowhere. And the next step is away from a ministry position. And that next step for us was away from each other. And I think that was hard. And so there's a lot of different steps that we had to take. But I think that's what really the call to ministry is that next step, that step to continue on down the path of what it means to be on the call.
I mean, and I think you're 100% right on the calling, because the reality is, like, Christ tells us in Scripture, like, anyone who wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and pick up their cross and follow me. And the reality is, like, I think in this season, it was just a constant act of submission and surrender. A lot of grief, obviously, as we were saying goodbye to a lot of things that we loved. obviously a church that we loved, and obviously this friendship that we've learned to love and cherish. And just because obviously we're not in the same states and obviously not in the same church doesn't mean we're that this friendship has ended. In fact, I think we're doing really well.
I do too.
So we're still doing a podcast together. But the reality is, like, when you have that calling, there is a calling, a deeper calling that comes with it, a calling to be fully surrendered to the Lord. And I think that's not just a calling for his ministers, but for every disciple of the Lord. I just think when it comes to ministry, I think there's a deeper surrender because of just the things he has called us to specifically. And I mean, if it was not for the clear calling that the Lord had given me, I probably would not be here right now. Because the reality is, like, I talked to you guys during the merger, but like during the merger, like, I mean, Caleb just said it, like, we both had gotten promotions. Like, it was great. Like, everything like Caleb and I had dreamed of and prayed for, like, we had it. Like,
for 1 week.
Yeah, exactly.
For a whole week.
It, like,
For a
and
whole
again,
week.
like,
We planned so much in 1 week.
no, and I mean, it was good. Like, for the time, it was, but God had something better. And again, that's not like, we're not sitting here saying like we didn't like what happened, but like the reality is, like, we had it there. It was the dream.
There was
who doesn't want to work with their best friends in a church in a context that they've grown up to love? So it's just during that season, it was really hard for me. I was like God, you call me to ministry, but if this is the ministry, like, I don't want it. Like, this is hard. Like, this has called me to a deeper level of surrender that I'm personally not comfortable with, because it's like, Caleb, you can agree with it, because like within a week we had the job, and then within a few months we had lost it. So it was pretty much like just kind of into that mindset of just like, what do we do? Like, God, you had called us to this, and now, everything's in the fire. So it's like, what's your will?
I think too, like, the amount, like, this is gonna sound like not humble, but I think, like, for all of us, just the leap of faith it took, like, there was just a lot of change. There still is a lot of change. Like, like, you're not, I mean, you don't know where you're gonna be forever, Keaton. Like, this isn't, your position's not a forever position necessarily.
None of us
Like,
are.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's the other thing in ministry.
Yeah.
Nothing's forever, and also, like, I mean, like, my thing, like, I don't even have a position in ministry right now, and so like the faith that we, even just the trust in God that we had to do through all of this, and like, how are we listening, like, what is going on, like, off of what we do. We haven't been on this podcast. A lot of that was because we truly just needed to rely on each other, rely on God in this, and be like, we needed each other about what we were doing and figure our lives out before we could do anything else. Like, I mean, a week ago, I wasn't even in Ohio. Like,
Right.
I was somewhere else, and it didn't work out. Me and my wife didn't feel like that's where God actually wanted us. But 2 months ago, that's where we thought God wanted us. And so and for all of us, it's the learning and the faith that it can be hard in these seasons of change. We joke about you had everything for a week and you didn't, but like, the trust God in that, to be like, well, I thought you wanted this, but you want something else. That's a lot of trust that you guys had to do, both of you, what you were doing, because you thought that you had, like, that's where God wanted you. But, how do you go through that when that's not, apparently? It's like, just a lot happened, there's a lot of faith that when you go through change that you just kind of forget about. When you're in the everyday moments, you're like, yeah, I need to trust God. I need to rely on Him for my plans, for my future, but like, until that happens, you're like, that's easy. God, I love what you're doing. And then you're in the season of waiting. You're like, okay, God, what's happening?
Right. Like, I think back to like songs that we sang even before we even thought about there being a change in our lives, but like, shake up the ground of all our tradition, break down the walls of all of our religion. I'm looking back, I'm like, man, if I really understood what I was singing, like, would I actually sing those songs? And I think that we have to realize that when we're singing those songs, like, or even we say like, we want God's will, or we want God to do something amazing, we have to be willing to say, yeah, that might wreck my life. Like, it might mean that I have to move across the country. It might mean that we move to a different spot and have to move back. Like, it may mean like all these different things. It may have to mean that I have to go to a different church that I wasn't expecting to have to go to. But God's doing something amazing, and God's story isn't done. And yeah, He's gonna shake the ground, but He doesn't destroy it. And God has a plan for us, and he has a way that's perfect and pleasing that only he understands. But if we're not willing to say, like, yeah, God, I want you to do whatever you want to do, and I want you to use me however you want to use me, and then we have to actually be willing to step into what that is.
Yeah,
And for us,
so true.
we didn't all necessarily have that opportunity to be like, like, God, where do you want me to go? Okay, I'll step there next. Like, yeah, there's deserts. There's sometimes we have to walk through these times where, like,
Unknown.
when God shakes the ground, it seems like there's more rubble than there is path.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think, like, and you made just such a good point. Like, sometimes, where sometimes we're saying amen to a thing on a Sunday, like, yeah, God, use me where you want me. But, like, do we truly believe that in our hearts? Are we truly, like you said, we're singing these songs like, your way is better. But are we listening to that? Like, my dad this past weekend, I watched his service online, and he said, just because we go to McDonald's doesn't make us a Big Mac. So just because we go to church doesn't make us a Christian, and so, like, it's obviously a funny quote, but, like, just because we say, God, use me in whatever way you want to use us doesn't mean that we believe that in our hearts. And so that's why, there are seasons where God's like, you said that. Now I'm going to test you. I'm going to test you because you said, use me in whatever way you want, you know?
Yeah, and the reality is, I think you're right, Will. Like you said, it God's way is better. And the reality is, I don't think any of us in this call right now regrets anything that's happened. I am, like, honestly, I'm so happy with where I'm at right now. Like, I never thought, like, even like a few months ago, if you would have asked me, I'd be like, no way. But like, I'm genuinely loving what I'm doing at the place that I'm doing it. And I think, Caleb,
That's
you can
awesome.
say the same thing. And Will, I mean, even in your job search, I mean, you took a massive leap of faith early on.
Yeah.
You moved, like, you and your wife picked up everything you had and you went to the place that you thought God was calling you to. And you didn't just, like, go and visit, but, like, you lived with the people for, like, weeks. And then you just decided, like, no, this isn't actually where God's calling us. And I mean, the level of faith and obedience it takes just to say, yeah, Lord, like, we're just gonna go and we're gonna do this because we think it's what you want. And to have even the greater boldness to be like, yeah, we made the mistake, we misheard you. Like, that's
Or
okay.
was it a mistake? Was it a mistake? Because I think that we talked about being tested. I think this was a massive test of faith of, are you willing to go wherever I want you to? And when there's not necessarily a clear path to get there. And Keaton said it, like, you packed up everything, you had a clear plan, and I think you followed God's direction to the T. I think that was just an incredible leap of faith. And I think even, like, now hearing you talk about it, even, like, offline from this podcast, like, I can see that God's doing something through you. God's showing you a new path. God's doing something even while you're in Ohio to work for his kingdom. I think that's been really cool to see that I don't think this was a misstep or a mistake or a mishearing, but that you followed God's direction. Like, Abraham had to be tested. Is he going to sacrifice Isaac?
Yeah.
And he went all the way to the top of the mountain, and God sent him right back down.
Yeah.
And God provided through it, but, like,
Yeah,
he went all the way.
God didn't take that, and he was like, haha, you made a mistake. You were going to kill your son. You thought that I wanted you to murder your son? But, yeah, I mean, I think what you said, like, sometimes we have to walk in the rubble. When God shakes up the ground, that doesn't always mean that there's going to be a yellow brick road leading us to, his kingdom. Sometimes it's an uncharted path. And honestly, like, I spent 2 weeks in Choma, Zambia this past summer, and, like, they have just the most unwavering faith. Like, my wife's family just went through some trouble this summer, and these kids, I went to an orphanage, and these kids were like, I'm going to pray for your wife's mom. Like, I'm going to pray for your wife's family. And I was like, you guys are demonstrating the faith that I should be giving, like, demonstrating for you, Like, you just the type of unwavering faith that we, like, they displayed and that we need to have, I talked to a kid and he's talking about their church service, and they start prayer on Saturday night, and they pray all through the night until service goes. And he said it's our appetizer before service. And he said too, this was my favorite thing. He said, if somebody's on their phone on a Sunday, we kick them out. He's like,
No Bible app for you.
well, just the fact of, like, he's like, I don't think they're using the Bible app, but he's like, if somebody wants to text they're not they're not that's not what they're here. Like that's the devil. Like they very much believe in like that the enemy attacking, and it's true. And so they're like, if they're trying to distract us from bringing to our faith, they don't, not that we don't want you here, but we believe that you should have your undivided attention. And we were just awestruck. We were like, imagine, we were like, you should come to America and see what church looks like in America. You got people playing Monopoly while the pastor's preaching, you know? Like, and so I think it's just amazing that sometimes we just forget that, like, our faith needs to be unwavering. And that there will be times of hardship and there will be troubles, but that doesn't mean that God's going anywhere. That doesn't mean he doesn't have a plan for our lives, everybody's lives, the universe, like and so I think we forget that sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, Caleb and I just finished reading a book for a class, but honestly, it was life-changing for me. That A Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards. And one of the things that stuck out to me was actually, it was in chapter 17. It was talking about David in the cave. And it specifically said, because it's like, it takes the mindset of like an interviewer trying to interview like one of David's mighty men. And he's like, and like the mighty men's kind of like joking around about it. He's like, yeah, we were mighty. We were a bunch of hermit outcasts that were living in the cave. How mighty were we? But like, he's like, David didn't teach us winning, he taught us losing. He didn't teach us authority and power, he taught us submission and surrender. And it's just one of those reminders that David was the man, the great king that we look at today because of the suffering that he endured during the moments in which Saul was hunting him down. And like, just in this season, like, I'm just so grateful because I can see the way God has taught us in our losses. And while we have seen great victory because of our God, we saw great losses early on. Again, we've mentioned them, but like, we're not around each other much anymore. Like, we're not physically in the same room. So that's a loss. Obviously, not working at the same church can be hard. So many other things that we suffered together. But the reality is God has turned that all for good. And we are now the pastors and leaders that God has called us to because of those events. And I do not think it is a mistake. Honestly, it was quite humorous to me that our last episode was how to lament as a church, right before we had to walk a church through what it looks like to lament.
Oh,
Yeah.
So it's just watching God use even things like this podcast to just turn losses and victories. It's been incredible. And honestly, the fact that we're here for season 2 is to prove the glory and the power of our God.
Yeah. Yeah, we've done like so much. I think we talked about coming back to this podcast in July? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were trying to post an episode before I went to Africa. And I was like, that might be tough. I was like, that, and then
we were moving and
then we're moving, and now we're here. Well, and then like I was moving, and I was moving again.
Yeah, and someone left their microphone in the moving truck.
There was a lot going on, and even now we spent probably a good 45 minutes trying to figure out how to even start this episode into like
God is good.
get
God
it
is good.
functioning. But here we are, and just like we said last season, every episode will be better because we'll learn how to do this format. But we just, the amount of times this summer, like, we need to get back to the podcast because we truly believe that God is doing something through this podcast. And now we're in different contexts. Like, that was another thing. We felt that this was a blessing in a way to talk about different contexts of ministry that we're doing. Same thing, we're living different daily lives now. And just these moments that, like, we now are so excited to do this. I think we have some great episodes coming up this season. We have some really cool things that we want to talk about. We have some really cool people that are going to come on here and talk with you guys. And so I think, a lot of change obviously happened this summer. We were supposed to be back May 1st, and it's October 13th, but God used that. And I think God used that in some ways to help this podcast.
Yeah, and we just want to say a special thanks before we close out. Thank you to all you guys. We would not be doing what we're doing without you guys.
Yeah.
In fact, during these months of radio silence, apologies, you guys were actually the ones making your voices heard. All three of us were hearing messages from many different people just saying, hey, when are you going to get back on the podcast? Like, hey, we're really missing that podcast. So it just meant so much to us that you guys loved the show so much that you wanted to hear more of it. And we were willing just to do whatever we could just to continue to have these conversations because they're so important. But that being said, keep tuned for season 2. Again, we're still learning some tech, so bear with us. Be gracious to us because we are still learning and trying to get through some of the kinks. But we love you so very much, and thank you for listening to the show.
Yeah. we're so excited to see how, God uses us this season, but also we're so excited hopefully to figure out how we can communicate more with you guys. I mean, hear what you guys want to hear and also hear what God's doing as you guys as listeners in your guys' lives. So like don't be afraid in the comments or wherever to just please talk about like what's God doing through you. We would love to hear that. We love hearing those things. And whether you're a congregate member or you're on staff or whatever you're doing in ministry, because everyone does ministry. We want to hear those things. It's really cool to see what you guys are doing.
Well, this was a little bit of a different of an episode where we're talking a lot about our story, but we will be back again in our next episode with a little bit more normal Sound Doctrine content. But we thought that you guys deserved a little explanation about where we've been and how God's been using us. And we'll be back again with another one. So continue to keep singing.
Keep seeking.
And let Sound Doctrine lead the way. See you guys.
See you guys.